The Nintendo Switch successor is all anyone can talk about these days in the Nintendo online gaming community. The Switch brought with it a revolution for what the Red brand brought to the table in the gaming space and has radically shifted the overall market in what looks to be 2 generations worth of their legacy. While there's still much to learn about the so-called Switch 2, today marks 2 decades since the last time Nintendo released hardware that would go on to define 2 generations of the company's ongoing legacy. Let's look back on 20 years of the Nintendo DS. Released on November 21st, 2004, the Nintendo DS was a pretty big deal at the time, ditching the Game Boy name for 2 screens on one device. A bulky, new vision of the future was unleashed to the world. Being born in 1997, I'm pretty sure I wasn't aware of the DS until the revision, the Nintendo DS Lite, and to many, this is the Nintendo DS. From what I'm aware, the DS really did take off with the Lite. 2006 had several of the handheld's biggest games, including what would end up being its best-selling title with New Super Mario Bros. And this combination of a revision and library being bolstered helped set it on a path to become the 2nd best-selling video game hardware of all time. The DS family sold better than the PS4, the 360, the Game Boy line, even the Nintendo Wii. It's only second to the PlayStation 2, which arguably only got the number 1 spot because it was a DVD player. But when we look at the DS generation, at least compared to the Wii, yeah, they each had their own gimmicks, but as far as appealing to hardcore while still having mass market appeal, the DS succeeded a little more when looking at the library. People often talk up the DS library, so let's take a look back at some of the best the console has to offer. I spent some time with all of these games pretty recently to give some modern 2024 impressions on them, so let's just dive in. In hindsight, there's not much I can really say interesting or new to add to the conversation about New Super Mario Bros. For the DS. It is the best-selling title on the handheld, hitting 30 million units. The success of this title definitely influenced, some would say doomed, 2D Mario for the following 20 years basically, but in itself, it's just a really solid Mario adventure. Like, the cool thing with this release is the mini-games that were also featured in Super Mario 64 DS, at least if you ask me. Speaking of, 64 DS is fascinating as a promise for what the future of handheld gaming would be. This was one of the first DS games you could play, and as a kid who loved Mario 64, it was mind-blowing to have a remake of this title on a handheld. The structure gets shaken up a bit with more characters thrown into a world that wasn't designed for them, but it's still a very neat project. Another one of the best sellers on the handheld, Mario Kart DS is the successor to the last mainline Mario Kart game, Double Dash. Mario Kart DS added online play, which is something I never experienced personally, but something I did experience was DS download play. This was such a novel, I almost want to say pro-consumer feature that let you play multiplayer with other DS handhelds that didn't have the game. Mario Kart DS was maybe the best example of this, but what made sure you had multiple copies and isn't pro-consumer? Pokemon. Pokemon had a bit of a renaissance on the DS, with many of people's favorites from the entire series found on this device. Now, the best-selling Pokemon of the DS was Diamond and Pearl, which I'm very nostalgic for because Pearl was my first DS Pokemon game, and I love Sinnoh, but the real star of that generation is Pokemon Platinum. Platinum is a much more refined version of Gen 4 with beautiful pixel art. At the time, the event support system seemed pretty endless here as well. There were always new reasons to go visit a GameStop or a Toys R Us to get like Darkrai and Shaman to spawn in a new location and hunt for legendaries. Platinum is really pretty excellent. But the DS is also home to what many would consider the greatest Pokemon games of all time, being Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. These really are remarkable in a lot of ways, most notably actually making Johto a fun region to have an adventure in. As remakes though, these are still the bar for the series, and they're, no pun intended, the gold standard for what Pokemon can and should offer, from a content perspective to flat out gorgeous art, and overall being an acclaimed RPG. Speaking of acclaimed games though, let's talk about the best reviewed DS games, starting with the highest. GTA Chinatown Wars. This is actually one I have absolutely no experience with. I played it for the first time in preparation for this video, but this is an interesting release under that franchise because it touches back to the classic Grand Theft Auto and Grand Theft Auto sequel from the PlayStation 1 that was just like a top-down open world type game. It's a very interesting project. You would never see a game like this released today from Rockstar, so for what it is, it's an interesting nugget of history at the very least. And while we're talking about history, Chrono Trigger is not a DS game, but many folks will tell you this is the definitive version of what is the greatest JRPG of all time. Now, I haven't played the whole game on the DS, I'd like to pretty soon, but as someone who has beaten it elsewhere and also agrees that it's pretty flawless and the best JRPG of all time, at least that I've played, yeah, being able to experience a definitive version with all of the cutscenes and extra content and a good translation on one of the best gaming handhelds ever, it's a match made in heaven. So the DS clearly had a strong run in its day, but how's the experience today? Well, more and more people have been growing nostalgic for the early millennium age of gaming and the DS generation. A lot of people have also been looking to return to this time in some respects, visiting the library again, collecting hardware, or just trying to explore games that they never got to play on a device they love. The DS, and I'm talking about the Lite specifically here, is maybe Nintendo's best looking hardware they've ever shipped. I love the GameCube, I love the Wii, they look great. Even the Switch design is good, but god, the DS Lite is just so damn slick. Playing it as an adult, it's still fairly comfortable. I know people will have hangups today with the small screens or cramped controls, but honestly, for the amount of time I'll sit and play with the DS right now, or if I'll pick it up on a train ride, it's still a pretty great experience. Maybe it's nostalgia as well, but I really miss a truly pocketable portable. The Switch is amazing, but I need to travel with a case and a bag and make sure I have enough space for it. Same with the Steam Deck. Now, if you want to get into the DS library today, you're pretty limited in terms of Nintendo hardware to play them on specifically. Yeah, some of the library made it onto the Wii U, but the Wii U shop is dead now. Plus, some of the console's biggest and best games are still stuck on the DS. We've seen games like The World Ends With You make it to mobile and Nintendo Switch in a compromised way, since it's arguably the best example of designing a game based on two screens. So if you remove the two screens, the game changes drastically. Some of the more popular visual novels that began on the DS, like 999 and Ace Attorney, have found new life on single-screen devices and are very popular on them. But like, two mainline Zelda games are still stuck on the DS. Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks are often on the bottom of people's mainline Zelda rankings, typically citing the way you control Link, or rather guide him, as the reason for their reception. But there really is a whole lot of fun DS-based design in these games. Same goes for like Kirby and the Canvas Curse. If you care about Nintendo history or really great RPGs, the DS library is really worth exploring. The secondhand market is pretty okay right now. You're able to find a DS Lite from $50 to $80 depending on its condition. For folks that really love the larger handhelds and displays, you'll want to look at the DSi XL. Screen-wise and scaling, a lot of folks say this is the definitive way to experience the DS library, and it is hard to argue. The DSi XL has a great looking screen. Most of those skew closer to $100, but you can still find some for a little bit cheaper. Game-wise, it's kind of tame. A lot of titles are floating between $20 to $50 depending on quality or availability. Then you got the Pokemon games, which I wouldn't do that. But yeah, I think the DS in 2024 is still a really charming device with a lot of great games that are best experienced on original hardware. Iconic ones like The World Ends With You and Elite Beat Agents, but some of the WarioWare titles for the console as well, and Metroid Prime Hunters, and obviously the incredible Pokemon games, a bunch of remakes of some of the greatest Dragon Quest titles. Final Fantasy had a great run on the console. It is really endless, again, especially if you like RPGs or puzzle games. When we look at Nintendo's history, the constant seems to be that their handhelds are always consistently a success, and in hindsight, I think the DS specifically really influenced the company in a number of ways following its introduction. Sure, Nintendo has always been bold, making a controller you swing to operate, or introducing a console with 2 ways to convey information as you play. But looking at what they did after the Nintendo DS, it feels pretty clear that that sort of philosophy was important to them, or at least interesting to them. While the Wii was still on shelves, coasting off shovelware, Just Dance, and Blue Ocean titles, Nintendo decided their next hardware release would be a successor to the more popular handheld device, the DS, with the Nintendo 3DS. The logic and influence there, as a follow-up, makes enough sense. I don't think we have to explain it that much. The 3DS didn't sell as well as the DS, but it still totaled around 76 million units at the end, which is around double the amount of the GameCubes they sold, and far better than the last few Xbox consoles, so yeah, still a success in the eyes of many. The real interesting move about their future following the success of the DS is how Nintendo adapted its dual-screen design philosophy to their home console strategy. The Wii U has a lot of issues, as did the Wii, in terms of what this era ended up being for Nintendo, and that could make up an entirely different video, but what I want to focus on here is the clear influence the DS had on the Wii U. So many games for this console, like the DS, implemented the dual screen approach, whether it be referencing a map, inventory, or inputs away from the TV like Splatoon. Whether this dual screen approach was used on the Wii U to capture more of the DS audience or not, the fact of the matter is, it's a dual screen approach, and the Wii U is the only non-DS Nintendo console capable of physically playing and emulating that library in a somewhat authentic way. In the end, though, the 3DS ended up selling, 6 times the amount of Wii U's? The 3DS largely took priority in terms of sales, marketing, and games during the Wii U generation, so yeah, the legacy of the DS did pay off for Nintendo, essentially defining the main vision of the company from 2004 all the way up to 2017. I would even argue the legacy of the DS is felt today with the Switch. Now, the Switch itself marks a new era for Nintendo as we look ahead to the next generation, but the very reason the Switch is a hybrid device in the first place is because after the Wii U, Nintendo reflected and realized their success and audience, it's focused on handhelds. Looking back, it's pretty clear the philosophy of the Nintendo DS and the creativity its design inspired guided Nintendo for the better part of nearly 2 decades through the 3DS and the Wii U, all the way to consolidating their development pipeline for the Nintendo Switch. Sure, there's not any specific game I'm aware of that makes the form the function. There might be some Mario Party minigames, but the Switch is about being practical more than it is about inspiring software design. Different philosophies, but equally as definitive about where Nintendo seems to be headed in the years following their respective launches. I'm not sure we'll ever see something as bewildering of a concept as the DS ever again, and for that reason alone, I still think it's worth revisiting the library and hardware 20 years later, even if it is just through a 3DS via backwards compatibility. It's certainly of its era, but it may just be the most important device Nintendo has made, at least that I've been able to witness so far. I feel like a lot of people my age have tons of great stories about the DS, or how they used it, what Nintendo games they discovered, what little gems they got obsessed with, and of course we can all bond about hiding it under our pillow when our moms came in to make sure we were asleep. So let me know your favorite memories of the DS over the last 20 years. Thank you so much for tuning into this video, and as always, if you've enjoyed, be sure to subscribe and stay tuned to more from us at Game Rant in the future.